Here we go. Sorry, everybody. So if we already had a diagram tile that we wanted to use, we could go ahead and pick it here. However, we're going to go ahead and create a new one. We only get one option here, and it is the diagram tile. And just like all of the other decisions designer elements that we've created so far, we're going to give it a name. And I'm going to call this my total purchase requests tile. Once we've given it a name and we click create, it's going to drop us into the Flow Designer. This is still the Flow Designer. It's a minimized version of it, and we use it for a different purpose. You can see that there's no start or end steps here. What we're going to do is we're going to lay out graphical elements here, and we're going to use this as a WYSIWYG editor, what you see is what you get editor, to design what our tile is going to look like. So this is where we can really start to get creative. Of course, whenever we're working on a project, very often our customer or the design team that we're working with is going to have some pretty specific guidance for us as to what these tiles should look like. However, we as designers can provide input on that. And this is an area where, at least for our purchase request system, we can start to feel a little bit creative. So one way that we could do this, and a way that I usually start whenever I'm creating diagram tiles, is to add myself a space to work in. So I'm going to add just a rectangle here that I can use as some kind of lines to draw inside. I'm going to make it approximately the same size and shape as the space on my page that it's going to take up. We don't have to keep this. You may want to use this as part of your design element. You may want to have borders around it, put shapes around your tile so that on the page it appears like they're inside their own box, and you may not. But whenever we're working in this diagram tile designer, anything that I put on this canvas anywhere is going to be fitted into that diagram tile space. So if I put one really small element up here at the top left corner and one really small element down here at the bottom right corner, those two things are still going to appear inside that tile. It's just going to shrink them down with relative space in between them, and it's going to look a little bit funky. So I like to give myself just a little bit of space to work in. I'm going to place all of my elements inside this square, and then that's just going to give me an idea of what this is going to look like on the page. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to add from the annotation section a couple of labels. So these are what are going to tell our user what kind of data they're looking at, and then also we're going to use these to display the data itself. So first, I'm going to add a medium label. And this is going to be the title or the indicator to my user what data we're looking at. And I'm going to say total purchase requests. It fits pretty nice and neatly inside my box. And so when I'm designing these elements, a lot of times the instinct is to immediately or to try to make the label bigger than the actual data. Sorry, excuse me, just a moment. So the instinct may be to make the label bigger than the data. There's just something about our brains that says, title big, key information small. But in our case with this diagram tile, we're trying to make that information relevant to our users and display it to them in a convenient and intuitive way. So the label should actually be a little bit smaller than the actual data in most cases. So whereas I used a medium label for the actual title for my tile, I'm going to grab a large label, and that's going to be where I put my actual data. Now, currently, this is just a label, just like labels that we've used before, labels that we put on our forms, labels that we put on our pages. It's just some text. it says step 1. And if all goes well, our user should never see those words step 1. We're going to be replacing this with an actual value of those total purchase requests in our system. Now, even though the user is never going to see it, I still would like to put a bit of placeholder text here. So you could put something there like something that would indicate that an error has happened. You could say data not available, contact administrator, something like that. However, I'm just going to put total requests. Oh no. I made a line. Got to get rid of it. There we go. And so even though it's not actually going to be inside my box, I'm going to move the center of my label off over here to the right. So this is going to be a number for, in our purposes, that's going to be probably a 2, maybe a 3-digit number if you all become very industrious with debugging your purchase request project. So Tom asks, what element did you just create another label? So this is the large label out of the annotation section. So I'm putting it just a little bit off center. So right now it's got my placeholder text in it, but the actual number that displays here is only going to be 2, maybe 3 digits. So all of this total isn't actually ever going to appear to my users unless something is broken. Now, what I want to do over here in this space at the bottom left is this is a diagram tile. We can make our elements graphical and we want to make them interesting to look at. So I'm going to add an image to my diagram tile. So I'm going to grab an image out of the annotation section and just drop it into that bottom left corner. So now that I have my image element on the page, in the properties for that image element, I can scroll down to the very last section that says image. And here I have a little editor, just like we've seen with text before. I can click the pencil and make changes to what that image icon is actually going to be once our tile is rendered. So I'm going to click the pencil and it brings up this little image picker. In here, we have a whole repository of, I don't want to call it clip art, but available images that are in our decisions image repository that you can choose from. There's just about anything that you can think of in here for just like basic, I need to, show an icon to represent this idea kind of images. But you can also add your own either from another web source or upload from your computer. So I'm going to be showing total purchase requests. So I think something to do with finance would be good. Maybe something that indicates, large purchases or an enumerated number of purchases. And there's this little invoice icon. Of course, we're not dealing with invoices, but it looks like it's a list and it has a little money symbol on it. So I'm going to go with that. Yeah, I know we ought to have Clippy. That'd be pretty good. Yeah, go for it, Colleen. Yeah, definitely. I want you to get creative. So feel free to, design your tiles any way you want. The only thing that I absolutely need you to have is the total request label. This is what's actually going to be functional. But yeah, feel free. I'm going to change the background color. We're going to do some funky stuff with the design on this. And now that I have all of my elements on my square, this is where my square comes in handy for me because I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of space here. Some things look strange. So I'm going to move some elements around until I'm satisfied with the layout. And of course, whenever we're designing, we're probably going to do a lot of this. I'm probably going to create this tile. I'm going to make it look more or less the way I want. I'm going to put it on the page. You're going to see this happen live. I'm going to say, oh, that doesn't look quite the way I wanted it to. If you are smarter than me and you have a background in like design or specifically web design, you can absolutely go in and set all of the specific pixel values that you want for these things. However, I'm not good at actually guesstimating, what the pixel values I want are. So I do this trial and error method. So I like this layout. However, it's just black text on a white background, and I think that's pretty boring. So I am going to change this. So I'm going to change the background for my tile by taking away from any of my design elements. So nothing is currently selected. I just clicked into the empty white space of the canvas, and I'm going to change the background color for the overall tile space. It's going to change this. So in the properties section, I'm going to choose the background color element. And just like we've done before, I'm going to select the pencil so that I can pick a color that I want. So this is going to be the total number of requests. And we're going to have one that has to do with dollar values later. So I don't want to use green. I want to use green for that. So instead, I think I'm going to make this one blue. And I'm going to choose this nice kind of medium dark blue from the top. Now you'll see it didn't change the color of my rectangle. This is actually something that for my tile, I'm going to delete in just a moment, probably. However, just for the purposes of making the design look nice while I'm building it, I'm going to go ahead and select my rectangle, and I'm going to change its background color to be the same. Move that back down. Yeah, so for the main background color, so you just want to select the empty space, the empty canvas here in the designer. And then in the properties, it's the very first section under tile inputs. So no, unfortunately, there is not a keyboard shortcut to save, but you do want to use the save button in the action bar frequently. Some keyboard shortcuts work sometimes, but Control S is not one. And so now I have a blue background and it still has black text on it. This is actually, I think it's fairly readable for me. However, it may not be for lots of people. And from a design perspective, it's just like blue on black. It's like it's pretty muted. There's no pop here. So I am going to go ahead and change the color of my elements that I've added, my two labels and my image, to be white so that they stand out a little bit more on the blue background. So I'm going to select each of those elements. And then I'm going to scroll down to the font attributes section. So I'm changing the font color, not the background color for these elements. So in the font attributes section, I'm going to click the pencil. And for each of those, scroll down to the label color and select white. I'm going to do this here. I think this, yeah, cool. So now you'll notice that when I selected the image, I just, kind of instinctually, and I kind of knew that this wasn't going to work, but I decided to try it anyway. So if we try to do that with the font attributes on the image, like we have the font attributes, even though there is no actual like text here. So if we scroll down, we can find that image section again. So this is where we created that image. We're going to select the properties to the right. And then we're going to change the color in here. Now I'm pretty satisfied with the look of my tile. I think I'm done building for now. So I'm going to go ahead and select my placeholder rectangle and just delete that. So now I know that I don't want this to actually say total requests. I want to display a number here. So in order to create that data flow in just a moment so that we can populate that metric, I'm going to have to set up input data on my diagram tile flow. I have to tell this diagram tile that it should be expecting a variable passed into it to display in this space. So at the top, underneath the action bar, I'm going to click Setup Input Data. And it's going to drop us into the data definition screen like we've seen before. And I'm going to make a variable called total requests. I'm going to set that to be an int. We should never have a fraction of a request, I don't think. Once we've defined our variable, we're going to save and close the data definition screen. So now our diagram tile flow knows that a variable is going to be passed in to represent total requests. It knows that it needs that variable. Now we're going to tell it what to do with that. So we're going to select our total request label, our total request placeholder label. And in its properties over on the right, we're going to go all the way down to the configuration rules at the bottom. And we're going to select the very top option, label from data. Once we do that, it's going to create an additional settings properties section in the properties bar called inputs. And it just says text. It wants to know what text it should be replacing total requests with. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pick and then choose our total requests variable that we created in the given inputs. So here we're telling Decisions that for this diagram tile element, a variable called total requests is going to be passed into this diagram tile from somewhere outside. And then for this label, we're telling it that it should be replacing the text total requests with that total requests variable that's being passed in. Yeah, so for the label, we go down to the configuration rules and its properties, select label from data, and then that gives us the input section to map in that variable. So what we're going to be displaying here is a pretty simple value. We probably could make it work with a string. However, it's probably going to be easier for us as designers to make it an int, since this is going to be a whole number that we're going to be passing in. So we could take it as a string, reformat it, tell Decisions, hey, accept this number that I'm giving you as a string instead of a number. However, make it a little bit easier on ourselves by just telling it that it's a number to begin with. So now I'm pretty satisfied with my tile. I like the layout. I think that this looks pretty good. I've worked out my data here. So I'm going to be passing in my total requests. My total request label is going to take that value and replace it so that it shows here. I like what I've done. So I'm going to go ahead and save and then close the diagram tile designer. So as soon as I did that, if you have very fast eyes, you'll see that down below, there's this new edit purchase request dashboard input flow. So it created, whenever we closed and saved the diagram tile flow, it created this input flow down below. And this was generated because we created that given input in the diagram tile flow. So because we told it, hey, there's a variable here in the given inputs that you should expect to have, it said, okay, well, here's your flow so that you can tell me what that variable should be. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that input flow in the diagram tile section, the second edit flow button down below. And it takes me into another flow designer, but this one should look a little bit more familiar. It's got a start step, it's got an end step. I have all of my usual favorite steps that I'm used to seeing. So here we're going to be laying out steps to generate that figure, that total number of requests figure that we're going to be displaying in our tile. And just like we saw in the slides, when I select the end step, you can see it already knows, hey, the whole purpose of this flow to exist is to tell decisions what total requests is. What is that piece of information that I should be displaying in that diagram tile? So we're going to add some steps to our flow to come up with that number. So there's a few different ways to do this. You know, there's usually many ways to do something in decisions. Both of the tiles that we're going to show you are actually pretty basic. They're pretty easy to generate. You can do it in one, maybe two steps for both of them. And we're going to show you the two of the most common ways to come up with these figures in both of these tiles. So what we're going to do first is we're going to use everybody's favorite step, the fetch entities step. This is an incredibly useful step in decisions that we use all the time. This is kind of like a SQL query. We're going to tell decisions to go out to one of our custom data structures or a data type that we have available to us. We're going to provide some parameters in the form of fetch criteria. So this is like the where element in our SQL statement to say, okay, go and find all of my purchase requests. And then we could say, well, you know, only find me approved purchase requests. Only find me purchase requests made in the month of March. Only find me purchase requests made by someone named Tom. You know, really any elements that we want to filter out, we could do that here. For our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and connect my start step to my fetch entities. And then in the fetch entity steps properties, you can see that I have this validation issue here. It wants a type name. So if we expand that drop down, well, it doesn't give the parameter types, of course not. So what we're doing here is we're searching for data types that we have available. So if I open up this user defined types section, and this is something that we also use quite a bit. So anytime we create a decisions data structure, a custom data structure, inside the user defined types, and we can find that in the steps toolbox, we can find it here in this type name definition dropdown. This is where we're going to find things to do with that specific data structure that we've created. You can see that I have several here. I have a few folders: case entity, database structures, defined data structures, entities, etc. So I get these folders because I've created each of these types of custom data structures in my decisions instance. You all probably have just one or maybe two folders in here. But one of the ones that you should have is the flow data extensions. So it's a slightly different wording, slightly different name, but this is the folder in the user defined types where your flow execution extensions are going to live. So you can see I have several in here. And I'm going to select the one that I'm using for this project. So I've given the type, you know, previous to now, I think this may be the first time that we've used a composite type in our class together. Up to this point, we've been using things like string, int, you know, decimal, date time. But we can also, I think we did use accounts at some point, potentially. I might be thinking of a different class. But we can also, whenever we're selecting a type, select any composite type that we have available too. And a composite type being, you know, a data type that's made up of other member data types, like our purchase request data structure. It's got all of those fields in it, like need by date, item name, price per item, that we can pass into our flow by using the fetch entity step. Go out and collect all of my purchase requests, all of the data that you have about that, and then add other steps to our flow to then manipulate or change that information or report on it. So another, just as an example, you don't have to follow along with this. Let's say I wanted to report on the accounts that I have in decisions, my decisions user accounts. I can start typing account, and I can choose that as a composite type that I can use the fetch entity step to go out and collect for me. Here we go. But for our purposes, remember user defined types. If I'm looking for data that I've created, I'm a user and I defined these types. So I'm going to find it in this section, either in the entity fetch definitions menu or in the steps toolbox. And so what I'm going to do now is the fetch entity step by default has two tails, results and no results. I say by default. If there is a way to change that, I'm not aware, but we don't actually need to. So the idea here is that just like with a rule where we may want to have diverging paths, so if this is true, do this, and if it isn't, do that, I may want to set up my flow in such a way that if my fetch entity step doesn't return any answers to me, I may want it to do something else. I may want it to generate an error. I may want it to redirect my user to do something else. Like, hey, you're wanting to know how many purchase requests there are, but there are no purchase requests. What else do you want me to do? For our purposes, though, we know that as long as we have data in the system, there's no chance of like no results returning unless something is legitimately broken. And we're not going to build out any error handling for our purchase request project. So I'm just going to connect both of those tails to my end step. I'm going to do one more thing because this is a best practice and it is important. I'm going to select my fetch entity step and I'm going to scroll down to its output section. So the fetch entity step is going to return a list of my purchase request data structure members, data structure, elements to me in an array. And by default, the fetch entity step answers are always going to be in a variable called entity results. So very frequently when we're building, especially very large flows with lots of big processes happening, lots of data structures involved, we're going to have several fetch entity steps. And it will break them in sequence if we try to use entity results for all of those variable names. Also, even if that weren't the case, even if Decisions was perfectly happy with using entity results for all of those different variables, we would still want to rename this to be something that's relevant to us. So I know that this is a list of my purchase requests. So I'm going to call this purchase request results. So this variable tells me that these are purchase requests. That's what I'm getting inside this variable. Result is an indicator to me as the designer that it's not just purchase requests. This isn't just like purchase requests that are being passed around the flow. This is the result of a query. I've gone out to the data structure and I'm asking for the list of them. And so I'm getting the results of that question that I asked. And then just at the end, the S is a little key, to me that this is an array. I'm not looking at one purchase request result. I'm looking at the array of purchase request results. So now on our end step, we know that we need total requests. That's the output that this flow has to generate in order for our tile to not display that placeholder text to our user. So on the end step, it has an output. So here in the end step, this is, telling Decisions when this flow exits, there should be a variable called total request that gets passed out from here. Now, in order to do that, we have to tell the end step where it's getting that number. So we're passing inputs into the end step to say this is what, what data you're taking in to create that variable to then pass out. So we're going to I'm going to go to my purchase request results. And then at the very bottom, there's a built-in feature in the available properties that we can use to collect the count. So right now I'm looking at a list, this will be a list of our purchase request elements. I can see that the type that I'm choosing from all purchase requests is CT purchase request. And then there's two little square brackets at the end. So this is a big one. If you're taking notes, I would encourage you to write this one down. If you see those square brackets, this indicates that this is an array. As opposed to our variable at the top, we're looking for total requests. It's an int 32 and there are no square brackets. So this wants a single number, not a list of numbers. And if I try to pass a list of numbers into it, it's not going to work. So I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find the built-in count variable. So anytime we're working with a list of items, we're going to have these three options that we see down here at the bottom. We've played with first and last before. We used that with our truth table results, but there's also this count feature that I believe you should have used in or you may have used in one of your end of day projects. But here I can just select this built-in available property, and it's just going to say, okay, well, the This is a sub-property of the list of CT purchase requests, and it's just going to say how many CT purchase requests are in that square brackets array. Yeah, so Tina, if we go to the end step on our flow, we have the output data. This is what we're trying to collect, and we have to pass it into the end step with the inputs. So I have select from flow selected. I'm going to edit to bring up my available properties menu. And I'm going to choose out of my purchase request results. And this is the entity results for my fetch entities step. Now, if you didn't rename the output on the fetch entity step, it's probably just entity results. So once we have that selected, I'm choosing out of my list of CT purchase requests to choose the count. And I can see that in the light gray, my type int32 matches the type that I'm trying to find. So this should work. I shouldn't get any validation errors by using this variable to pass in for this input. So once I do that, I click away from my instead, my validation errors are gone. My tile flow is happy with me. So I'm going to go ahead and flow designer and then close it. Then I'm going to save my purchase request dashboard, and we're going to go and take a look at our work. So I'm going to close and go out to the purchase request dashboard. Yes, do that. Aha, okay, so I have a problem. Let's see. I'm going to assume that that's probably the same for everybody. So what did I do wrong? Let's find out. So total requests. Total requests. Oh. That's strange. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. It's strange that we're having this inconsistency. So for those of you who works, help me work something out. So in your inputs for text, does it say string for the type? Yeah, you got it, Trevor. That's, we all learn together. So that's interesting. The inconsistency is strange. Okay. So let's do this. I'm just going to try to change this. So, I told Kristen in response to her question that I thought that this would work. I'm just going to try it. You don't have to click along. Go back to my data flow, make some changes here, string count, no validation errors, give it a shot. Interesting. Okay, so for those of you who are experiencing the same thing I did, I can't explain the inconsistency. I'm not sure why that's happening. It could be something to do with our instances. I know that mine is actually out of date. I need to update my version of Decision. So that was something that I intended to do before we got started, but we're already into class, so we're not going to do it now. So that could explain what's going on with mine. And for some of you, we know that our training instances can be a little bit wonky. We're sharing resources. However, the fix for that was just a change in our diagram tile flow. So for my given inputs, I just changed that to string, just make it match. And so like I answered with the question, it should work. It's just a good idea to keep our inputs consistent, our data types consistent with like what they actually are. Like for a date, for instance, we can take a date time format and then represent it as text as a string. And in some cases it is relevant and good to do that. But for the most part, we want to keep those things neat and orderly by following the same type all the way through. In some cases though, hey, something weird's going on, we make it work. We are developers. Go. So I'm just going to save, back on out, and take a look at our purchase request dashboard together. So if this were actually live, if this were a dashboard that I actually wanted to use in production and show to customers, I would go back and make some adjustments to the layout of my tile. As you can see, there's some weird spacing. It turns out that this is a little bit more rectangular shaped than I thought it was. So I would make some changes here. But for our purposes, I'm just going to leave that alone. We would go in, I'd resize some labels, change the layout of things. I might give some rounded corners on the square, but no big deal. So I'm going to pause for just a moment, give everybody some time to catch up, make sure that we get our first diagram tile finished and ask any questions. Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, I missed how to set up the dashboard. Right now, I can just preview it.
Gotcha. So let's hold off till next break and we'll walk through that. So how do you do rounded corners? Yeah, you know what, Tina, that's a good question. I am going to do it. So I actually started to do it. And that was one of the reasons that you might want to use that rectangle shape. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to add my rectangle back in under shapes. Grab my rectangle and drop it onto the page. Go. For the order, it's going to be 0. 0 should be the front, right? 9. Should be right. Oh, because everything else is white. Sorry. I'm still working on that coffee, everybody. So I'm going to change the background color. I was thinking that it was like in front of my elements. So this Z order, if you've ever worked in like Photoshop or other graphical editors, this is how you arrange like what's on top or what's, elements are behind the others. And I'm like looking at it, I'm like, it's 0. That should be at the back, right? And everything, nothing's appearing. That's because all of the elements are white. So we're going to go ahead and change the background color to blue. Oh, hang on. Still. Oh, everything is set to 0. That's fine. There it is. So as long as my background shape is set to the Z order 0, everything else will show up in front of it. However, as you saw, I had to make sure like the Z order is by default 0 for everything. So I had to go in and change that for all of them. So now I've got my rectangle around my element. I'm going to click back into the gray space or the empty space around my tile, so into the canvas, so that I'm looking at the properties for the tile itself. And then I'm going to remove that background color. So just hit the X, take that away. Yeah, and so Deepak, to get the number to show here, we had to provide our given inputs for the flow. And then we created our data flow outside back in the page designer for it to gather that number. And so those steps are on pages 95 through 100 in the click-through guide, if anybody needs a refresher to go back through that. So now I have my rectangle, it's got my rounded corners on it. I'm going to go ahead and save and close, and then check out my dashboard. What does it look like now? And so now I have this nice round, oh, we've got a weird image thing in the middle, but I have my rounded corners. It looks a little bit nicer. It fits a little bit neater. Like I'm not just filling up all of this empty space. Like I could, like I actually feel like this is actually a pretty good design element. Like we could leave this way. Yeah, so where to set the type to string? So in the page for the given inputs, or in the diagram tile flow, we set the type as string. So it depends, certain elements are going to display in preview. However, that's why we gave that best practice to go ahead and as soon as you start building, put your page into a folder and make it viewable as a user in the portal. So because some elements aren't going to display properly and so the preview is just going to give you an idea of like what the layout of your page is. You can see my tile doesn't actually show up here. My folder activity panel isn't working. Everything is shrunk down. I'm getting a sense for like what my layout is. Okay, yep, this is basically where I want things to be on the page. But then in order to actually view those things and interact with them, we'll want to use the final product. Yeah, so the black rectangle in the middle of the tile, it's this image right here. So it tries to put an image in the center and I haven't actually like defined an image. So I'm just going to hit the X there so that goes away. Here we go. And so now that we have our total requests tile built out, I'm going to add our second tile. So this is going to be the one that shows the total dollar value of purchase requests in our purchase request system. So I'm going to select my second tile and I can see that it has my diagram tile flow here. So I'm going to go ahead and pick or create my diagram tile flow to get started on that graphical element of my diagram tile. I don't have one that already exists that I want to use, so I'm going to create a new one. And then select diagram tile. We're going to give this a name, and I'm going to call this total dollar purchase requests. So it's going to drop me back into that simplified flow designer. So I don't have a start step and an end step. This is where we're going to design the graphical elements for our diagram tile. And so it's not going to match, but I am going to do a slightly different graphical layout. So I want us to get creative, and we're going to go kind of slow with this. So feel free to poke around in the elements that we have available to work with and see if anything strikes you and gets your creative juices flowing and makes you want to design a cool tile in a particular way. For the purposes of this one, I'm going to use this circle element. Expand that just a bit. Okay, so instead of using that, I'm just going to remove that. Grab the image, and then find myself a circle. Go. I'm going to use this one, circle outline here. Yeah, I like that. Make this a little bit bigger so that it's big enough to actually have my data appear inside it. I'm going to add another image just because we did with the first one. I'm going to make this one something to do with money. And choose this the stack of coins right here. And for this one, I'm going to use green for everything. I'm going to make all of these elements green with a white background. So for both of the images that I have on the page, I'm going to go ahead and change their color to be this kind of medium green from the top here. And just like we did before, I'm going to add two labels. So I'm going to use a medium label to put my actual label that's going to be shown to my users on this tile. So I'm going to say total request amount. Kind of center it above my elements and change its font color to. And then I'm going to grab a large label and put it right in the center of my circle. So I use the image circle. So the one from Shapes is a little bit tougher to resize. So I used the image under annotation and then found the circle image there. Yeah, so for everybody, to resize the circle, use the image option under annotation. And then in the image, select the circle icon from in here. Makes it a little bit easier to resize. So then you can just drag and move that to where you want. Interesting. So if you're using the annotation image for that and it's still not allowing you to resize, go ahead and save and close your diagram tile flow and come back into it. So that would be some unexpected behavior. And when, of course, Decisions is a browser-based tool, sometimes the browser is going to cause some hiccups behind the scenes. And if that's happening, we just want to save and close whatever we're working in, exit, and come back in. That'll usually clear up whatever cobwebs are preventing you from doing what you're trying to do. So yes, that's right, under annotation. So the image icon under annotation. And so now that I've got the layout for my tile, more or less the way that I want it, of course, we know that we may want to come back in and make some changes after we've actually seen how it looks on the page. I'm going to go ahead and start setting up the data. So I know I've got this step 1 here. I want to replace that with the actual dollar value of purchase requests in my purchase request system. So to do that, just like we did before, I'm going to go up to the input data underneath the action bar designer. I'm going to click Setup Input Data to get to the data definition screen. And in here, I'm going to call this total dollar amount. I'm going to leave it a string this time just because that worked for us last time. Why mess with it if you know what works? I'm going to save my data definition screen and then close. So now that I've told my diagram tile flow that it should have this total dollar amount variable, I'm going to click on my step 1 label, go all the way down to the bottom under the configuration rules, and select label from data. Once I do that, it creates this additional inputs option down below, and I'm going to map in that total dollar amount variable that I created before. So again, just to try to visualize this for everybody, by declaring the given inputs, we're telling this diagram tile flow that it should expect this variable to exist, that this is going to come from somewhere else outside of this flow. And then we're telling this label that it should be taking that variable that gets passed in and replacing this text with it. So once I've got all of that done, I'm going to go ahead and save my diagram tile flow. And then once I do that, if you've got really quick eyes, you'll see that it creates that input flow underneath for us. So now I'm going to edit that input flow so that I can create the data that's going to be placed into my diagram tile as total dollar amount. So before we use the fetch entity step, which again is, kind of like a SQL query, we're going out to our defined data structure and saying, hey, go ahead and find all of the records to do with purchase requests. And then we use the built-in count variable to tell us how many of them there were. Now, there isn't a built-in sum variable. There isn't a built-in sum property. So we're going to have to do some extra stuff inside this flow in order to come up with that number. So, and instead of using fetch entities, we're going to use a report to come up with the list of numbers that we're then going to be adding up. So we're going to add the run report step to our flow and connect our start step to it. So just like we were saying yesterday, reports are not one-time use, but they are one-use use. So I do want to make sure that I'm not trying to use another report that I'm using for something else for this. If I end up making changes to that report for whatever reason, it may break my other elements. And I want to make sure that I'm using one that's specific to this process to generate this data. So I'm going to click on my Run Report step. And where it says report setup, we have the pick or create report option, just like all of the other, many of the other steps and elements that we've used before. So I'm going to click pick or create. And I don't want to pick existing because again, everything, we want to make sure that the reports we're using are specific to the purpose we're using them for. So I'm going to say create new. And in the list, I'm just going to choose the standard report. And I'm going to call this my PR totals report. Once I've given it a name and I click create, it's going to drop me into the reports designer. So what we're going to add as our data source is, of course, our purchase request system. That's the data type that we're working with for all of the elements in our purchase request project. So I'm going to expand user defined types, go down to my flow data extensions, and select my purchase request data source. Now, in all, at least most of the other reports, if not all of the other reports that we've used, we've been adding a bunch of extra data fields. We've been adding, things like who's the user, what's their email, how much is it, when was the need by date, what's the state for it. But this report exists only to come up with the total dollar amount that's going to be displayed on our tile. So I don't need all of that other information. I don't need to know who the requester is, what the state is. So what we're doing right now is we are creating a report to generate our totals. So inside our purchase request dashboard input flow for our totals diagram tile, we added the run report step and we are creating the report to feed that. So we've just added our CT purchase request data type to that report. Go and the steps to do this. Let me find our page. So the guide actually uses the fetch entity step both times. So unfortunately, sorry, this one, I will go back and show anything that anybody needs because we don't have these steps written down. So like I was saying, we don't need any of those other fields. We don't need to know their email. We don't need to know their need by date. We don't need to know the state. The only thing that this report cares about is the total dollar value on each of those purchase requests. So under the data fields, I'm going to click add. And I'm going to find that total value in the list. And I'm just going to add that to my report. I'm going to select that total data field, and I'm going to go ahead and format it as currency. We may need to do this again at a later step, but I want my report to look nice when I'm looking at it anyway, even though we're probably never actually going to look at this as a report in itself. I'm still going to go ahead and format it, just because it does need to be formatted at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and do it here. So that's the only thing this report is going to do, is for each purchase request that we have in our system, it's going to display this single column with just the total dollar amount. So once we have this, I'm going to go ahead and save my report and close the reports designer. And so our run report step, by default, what it returns is an Excel file. We can see that in the output settings under return data option. By default, when this step runs, it's going to spit out an Excel file as its output. And we can see that in the outputs as well, that the type it's going to be using is file data. And while that could be useful, that's going to be useful for sending reports to management, or if we actually need an Excel file to work with for whatever reason. Decisions won't be able to read that Excel file, though, unless we add a whole bunch of other steps. So we could, add some other steps. Okay, now take the file and then interpret it and take, this is the columns, these are the rows, and define all of those things just like we would an Excel file that we were importing. However, we can just make life easier on ourselves, and under the return data option, select data rows. So the data rows option is how it will be returned out as an output from this step. And what in this case, data rows means exactly the way that we view the report in the reports designer. It's just the rows of data that decisions can interpret and read and manipulate. And so now, just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and connect my run report step to my end step, and we're going to take a look at what this looks like when we debug it. Here we go. So my run report step runs. When I look at the output data, I can see that in my report, it has my list of totals. So I have each of these total values being output as outputs of my report, and they're viewable here as variables or as output data in the outputs for my step. So I have the values here. So now I'm going to add additional steps to my flow that will allow me to add those values up so that I can have that single dollar amount value that I want to pass into my diagram tile. So on my tail after my run report step, I'm going to add an additional step. I'm going to go to all steps in the steps toolbox. I'm going to go to the data section and then numbers. And in here, I'm going to find all of my mathematical kind of basic steps for working with numbers in decisions. So the output type is data rows. The output for the report should be data rows. So in the numbers section, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the very bottom and find the sum step. Up to this point, we've added our run report step. Its output is data rows, and we created our report that just has our total values from our purchase request system. Now in the sum step, it wants a single input that it calls values, and it says it wants a list of decimals. So here I'm going to select from flow, and in the available properties, I can see my report. Its type is dynamic data rows, and I can see that it is a list. It's got the two square brackets, empty square brackets after the type name. So my values variable wants a list, and this is giving me a list. So inside the available properties for the report, we can see that there's, I think it's like 99. Yep, 99 of these all fields values. So each of these are the columns of our report. So all field 1 is saying every value that's in column 1 in the report that's being passed into this variable. So all field 1 is every value that's in column 1. All field 2 is every value that's in column 2. So I know that my report only has one column. So what I want is the all field 1. So you can see that we do have a bunch of sub properties here. We could say, all number value, that may end up being what we want to do. So this is going to match our type. So right now it's a cell value. However, the value that I'm looking for is a decimal. So you can see that I do have a validation error here. So it wants me to find something with the type decimal that's a list of values. So we're going to look through the list and see what stands out to us. Most of what I'm seeing here are Booleans, right? So all has value. This is saying any cells that appear in column 1 that actually have a value in them. It's a true or false. We could select that as a property. If the value that's in that cell is in fact a Boolean, a true or false value, we could select that here. let's see, we have, of course, the count first and last, as we've seen before, but the one that we want, the one that matches our type and that is going to give us the values that we need is the all number value. We can see that it's of the type decimal. It has the square brackets, so it's a list. And so that's going to be the one that we want to use to pass into the values for our sum step. And so once we've done that, I click away from my sum step, no more validation errors here. It's happy with me. Now my end step still has a validation error though. It knows that it needs that total dollar amount. That's the whole reason that this flow exists, is to determine what value should be placed on that variable in our diagram tile flow. So now I need to tell the end step what it should be taking in to pass out as that dollar amount value. So I'm going to pick my sum output. We can choose, formatting here. We could try to leave it as currency, and I believe it'll take this. So it says currency number format property. We know that the type we want is string, and this is one of those exceptions to these kind of guidelines I've been giving you. So we know it wants string. We have currency number format property. I'm like 99% sure it's going to take this without us having to do anything else to it. Let's give it a try. Let's see what happens, because we know we want it to appear as currency on the page. That's what we want our user to see. I want them to have that experience of seeing the dollar symbol and the 2 decimals. And so I'm going to do some development until we can make that happen. So I'm going to save, and then we're going to take a look at our tile. Save the page. Cool. So no such luck. Let's see what happened. So what I am going to try to do is I'm going to try to change this to a decimal. You don't have to follow along for right now. We're just going to do some experimentation together. Go. I'm going to try to make that work. I know our types don't match up, but it's also not throwing any concrete errors. So I'm going to see if it'll let me do it. Nope. Okay, so getting closer. So it's still not formatted as currency, but I am getting my number on the page. So we can see I have my purchase request number. It is formatted as a decimal, but again, I want to get that dollar symbol. I want it to only show 2 decimal places. So we're going to make that happen. Go. Go back into my page. Here, number value. And so what I'm going to do is on my sum output, right now we have all number values selected and it is as a decimal. So we know that we have all of these other available properties under here. We have the built-in defaults, count first, last, but then we can also choose some other formatting. So I know that many of us used the percent formatting option when we were doing the end of day challenge earlier this week. I'm going to use the currency one now to see if we can get that to change. Go, so let's do decimals. Oh, not here though, on the end step. On the end step, excuse me. So not on the sum, because the sum step can only take in decimals, and it wouldn't make any sense to actually pass in currency formatted values into it. Really, it's the answer that I get out of it that I want to be currency formatted. Apologies, everyone. So for that, So it worked for me by changing it to currency when I map it to the label. Oh, excellent. Very good. So actually in the tile flow. Cool. I'm just going to give this a shot. I think that you may be right on the money. Yeah, cool. Here we go. So we're going to go back into the tile flow. And here in our inputs, we have our total dollar amount. It knows it wants decimal. And so we're going to choose the currency property here. Take a look, see how we did. Fantastic. Great job, Stephen. So now we have our two tiles. Of course, like we said before, I may want to actually change some formatting on this. I wouldn't be satisfied with the layout of this tile if this was actually something that I was going to use in production. You know, I would want to make some changes to this, make it look a little bit nicer. But I think for our purposes, for just demonstrating the basics of how to create these tiles, I think this is pretty good. I think we've actually made something that's kind of cool. Let's see. And so for the total dollar amount, what we did was in our diagram tile. I'm just going to walk us back through the whole thing because I know we did a little bit of skipping around. So we set up our layout, including our step one label. This is the label that's going to show our value. We're passing in a variable into this diagram tile flow that's total dollar amount, and it is of the type decimal. For that label, at the very bottom in the inputs, or excuse me, in the configuration rules, we select label from data. That gives us that input that we can then define that we want it to be that total dollar amount variable that we're passing in. So it's saying this one that gets passed into this diagram tile flow is what we want to display there. And then we use the sub formatting property of that in the currency format. So I think that should get most of us where we need to go, but I'm just going to go ahead and walk through the rest. So then in our input flow, we added a run report step that contains a report with a single column that's just the total values of our purchase requests. And then a sum step afterward to add up all of those fields that are in that column one, and then spit out a total value based on those. So yeah, Will, that's definitely possible, at least with CSS. I'm not sure that we could do that without CSS. That may be possible, but typically speaking, what we see when we lay it out in, well, when we lay out our diagram tile elements in the designer is what we're going to see scaled to appropriate size on the actual page. So they do dynamically allocate, but it's going to be based on the actual canvas size, not the element, not the size of the tile area. And then the end step on our data flow, it knows that it needs to be collecting total dollar amount, and we've passed in the output of our sum step. Yeah, so Asha asks if using fetch entities plus sum instead of the report, which of these gives better performance? So that's a really great question. I want to say that in this case, where we're just like looking up one value out of a custom data structure versus a report that's going to be doing basically the same query, I could be mistaken, but I doubt there's going to be a massive performance difference between doing those two things. They're both basically performing the same function. Fetch entities is making a query to our custom data structure and returning the number of elements that we have in it. And then our report is also going to our custom data structure and returning a number of elements from within it. So I think that those are going to be pretty similar, if not identical, as far as performance. Good deal. So once we've got all of our tiles created, once we like our layouts, we have completed our purchase request dashboard. Now our user has this home base where they can go to interact with all elements of their purchase request system. They can see key metrics to do with this purchase request system that are displayed right in front of them and relevant to their role. They have some graphical representation of this data. They have the ability to look through all of the purchase requests that are available and even select them to get more details right from right here on the same page without having to navigate anywhere else. So what we're going to do now, we've been going for a little over an hour and a half. We're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break, go ahead and stretch our legs. And when we come back, we're going to pivot a little bit and start branching out away from our purchase request system just a little bit. So go ahead and take a 15-minute break. We will return. Let's go ahead and call it 11 a.m. even. So 11 a.m. Eastern time, we will return and continue on with our business analyst course. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope we had a pleasant break. We've refilled our beverages. We've gotten a little walk, stretched our legs, and ready to dive back in to our business analyst content. So we did get a question while we were at break. Total dollar amount is still not showing as the currency value. We've got a full decimal number with lots of decimal places, and we want to change that. So the way that we did that was in the diagram tile. We actually did this in the graphical tile input or the graphical tile flow. And on the label where we map in that value, so our variable total dollar amount, we then selected the subtype currency property format. So it's going to format it as currency right here in the label. So now we're actually going to pivot away from our purchase request project altogether. Our purchase request project is done. We have completed that. It's a full end-to-end application. Now, it may not be robust enough for most production environments. However, it is fully functional. You know, if someone wanted to use this in just its most bare bones fashion as it is right now, they totally could. We have a user interface for our user to submit a request. It's going to do logic on that. I'm going to go look at the flow while I'm talking about it. It's going to do logic on that request. It's going to set up our process folder so that we can have our data saved and reported on later. We have some rules that are going to make automatic decisions about these purchase requests so that fewer humans have to be involved. And we've set up tasks and assignments so that a manager is automatically selected to approve our requests and then can take action on those. We built out user interfaces. Of course, that's what we've been doing all morning and late yesterday. We built out user interfaces for our users to view reports on that data, get key metrics about it, and even a place to kick off that flow, all from right here in their home base of their purchase request dashboard. So clap yourselves on the back, everybody. You have completed your first end-to-end decisions application. Woohoo! So what we're going to do now is we're going to continue on in the click-through guide, starting on page 101. And we're going to pivot away from our purchase request project to tell you about some other elements and decisions that we think are important for you to know as business analysts, some other things that you may want to use in your decisions developer journey. So for some reason, when I click purchase request, the report on the page no longer updates the activity panel. So when you click purchase requests in the report, yeah, and so Stephen, so whatever you set the selection bus name to is fine. You can make that any characters you want. You can, you know, call it banana or really anything, as long as it matches. So the selection bus that you're selecting in the report, I'm just going to go back to the page so we can take a look at this. So in the report, on the folder ID, whatever we declare here in this box, we just also have to make sure that we declare in the folder activity panel. So here, get folder ID from selection bus. We just want to make sure that we have the same value here, whatever that is. And so we can see that actually happen. What we should be seeing whenever we click data rows, up here in my URL, my nav bar, it's changing that GUID. So every time I click a new value, that ID changes, and that's what updates the folder activity panel down here at the bottom right. Yeah, so that's a great question, Chris. I have an idea about where that goes, but let's see if we can just prove that for ourselves. So I'm going to open up my purchase request dashboard. Tap it. Let me just make a minor change. I'm going to say purchase request dashboard, purchase request reports, so that my label has something different, so I can save. Here in the notes, I believe this is going to go in the history. So if I go in to my info panel, 956, 1102, I believe that's going to be in here. No, check history. Checkpoint preview image. Yeah, so that goes in here in the folder data. We can see that label that I made whenever I made this save. This is again, a good way when we're talking about the info panel. This is all metadata that we can use to support our fellow developers. Most of the time, we're not going to be working on these things alone. And even if we are, we want to make sure that the flows that we create, the elements that we create in decisions are, so it's the old developer adage, right? You don't want the developer who has to come along and work on your code after you to take a look at your work and then want to hunt you down. You want to make sure that you're doing this in such a way that everything is commented well, labeled appropriately, nice and neat, so that other developers can look at what you've done and be able to easily glean what the purpose of that process is. Are these logs exportable? Yes, I believe so. So we can find all the logs in the system folder, and I believe that's where we might be able to export those, but yeah, I'm sure that they are. So any other questions about our purchase request project before we pivot to parent-child reporting? Cool. All right, so in the click-through guide, we're going to be picking up on page 101 with parent-child reporting. So again, this is going to be completely separate from the purchase request project that we have been working on so far this week. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create myself a new project folder. No, I'm not. Apologies, scrap that. This is going to take care of that for us. So what we're going to do is here in the click-through guide, there is a link. Let me just display this on the screen. Here in the click-through guide, there is a link to a Google Drive document. Save yourself some trouble, right-click it and open in a new tab. If you just click it here, it's going to take you away from the click-through guide and you'll have to come back and find your page again. It is page 101 if anyone finds themselves in that situation. But to make life easy, I'm going to open that in a new tab. So in here, parent and child reporting.zip, this is an exported decisions project. We're going to download this and import it into our decisions environment. So from Google Drive over here on the right, I'm going to find the little download icon. So it's the little down arrow with the little file box underneath to download this zip file. So while we're doing that, I'm going to give you a little bit of primer. So parent-child reporting is a common design pattern that we use to show related data structures. So information that's related to each other, but that are in disparate data types. So we can see the image that's on page 101. We have three data structures. There's policy, policy member, and claim. Now, these things are all related to one another. And in our project, we may want to have information about all three of those shown in one location in our project. We may need to say, okay, well, for a policy, go and find the member that's associated with that. Gotcha. Sorry about that, Trevor. I'm going to go ahead and just drop it into the Zoom chat. Oh, sorry, let me try that again. Into the Zoom chat. So we may have a process that's using policy, but we may want to know things about the claim that's associated with it. So we can see on page 101 how these things are related to one another. So policy has a primary key. This table has a policy number. This is the unique identifier that we can use to find and locate any specific policy in this data structure. Now that policy number, we can use that to look up a specific policy in this data table. Now, we also have policy members. So in there, we have other pieces of information. There's member ID, date of birth, full name, and we can see that one of the data members there is policy number. So the primary key for this table is member ID. That's the unique identifier for, oh, no, sorry, it's not. So the primary key for this table isn't listed here. Remember, entity framework, we don't always see these things. However, it does have policy number, and this in this case is a foreign key. This is telling our policy member data structure that there's an ID for another data set that is related to this policy member. So the policy number that appears here is the primary key for another row in the policy table. And we can continue on. We also have member ID. Member ID is the primary key for another data set in another table. So we can use these things by including these in our data structure. We can link these data structures together, make them reportable on one another, and make sure that all of the information we need is associated with all of the other information that we need. So yeah, Hansela, if I'm understanding you correctly, yes, I believe you're on the right track. So now we should have our parent and child reporting.zip file in our downloads. You can see it here on my screen. It's at the bottom of my Chrome window. And we're going to import this into our decisions environment so that we can follow the rest of the steps in the guide. So the way that we do this is in our decisions environment. I almost created a folder. That's not necessary. What we can actually do is I'm just going to grab this file, hover it over my decisions window, and it says drop file here. Once I do that, it's going to give me this file upload option. So I have two options here, import and add as document. So if I add this as a document, it just becomes a zip file that's in the file structure in my decisions environment that I could use, just like any other file. It'd be like a PDF or an Excel file in here. But that's not very useful for us. I don't just need the zip file in here. This is an actual decisions project that I want to interact with its designer elements. So we're going to click the import button. So whenever we're importing a project, it's going to outline anything that decisions can identify as a potential issue. So let's see what it's telling me here. So of course, my decisions is a little bit out of date. I need to update my local instance. So it's saying it's importing from a newer version. I'm currently on version 7.5, and it's alarmed. It's saying, hey, this was created in version 7.7.1, and you're importing it into an older version. Are you sure you want to do that? So for each of these issues, it gives me the opportunity to decide what I want to do with those elements that decisions is identifying as potentially problematic for me. So in this case, I know that this is going to work. So I'm not too concerned about my version mismatch. So I'm going to say ignore issue and import on all of these. Now, normally you wouldn't have such a long list. This is happening because every single element is being flagged with the exact same issue because my version is a little bit out of date. But normally we would want to look through this list and make sure, hey, did everything get imported correctly? What's going to happen to that? And take a look at the options that we have. Let's see, do we need to highlight any folder before we drag in the zip file? No, so once we complete the import, it's going to create our project folder for us. That's included as part of the import. So we just need to drag it onto the screen. So once I've reviewed all my issues and I've made my selections about what I want decisions to do about those potential issues that it encountered, I'm going to say continue import. Oh, so that's a good question, Michael. Will this be an issue in the shared environment? Potentially. You might end up with two folders that are named the same. I don't actually know how that's going to work. Let me see if I can try it. It might put a 1 after one of them. And in fact, it does, it looks like. Let's just see. I'm going to do it twice, and then we'll find out. What we're going to want to do in either case is I'm going to do a little bit of an experiment here on the screen. We're going to find out what exactly happens. But then you and your partner are just going to have to work together. You can Slack each other if Slack is available to both of you. And work out, hey, I'm going to take the one that's at the top of the folder tree or something like that. But you're going to want to grab one of those once this gets imported, and it's taking a minute for me, and just move it into your project folder just to keep it straight. So mine finally finished. And if I look in my folder tree, let me just do a little refresh. Project. So let's see. Here it is, parent and child reporting. So this is how it appears for me. So I'm just going to try to do this one more time. Let's see how it handles having two of these. Oh, did I do that as a, yeah, I sure did. I assume, and I believe, it's probably going to put a 1. An expected condition error. So I tell you what, if you can grab, if there are any more details about that, Deepak, if it's telling you anything more specific about what that error is, if you want to throw it in chat. That's a good question. So Galia asks, is the foreign key relationship a one-to-one? Exactly one policy with exactly one policy member. So I believe that's the way the project that we're going to be looking at is set up. We're going to take a look at it together. However, we may want to also have a one-to-many relationship with linked data structures with parent-child reporting. That's also something that we might do. That's not going to be part of the project that we're doing today. So what we're doing today is we want to be able to specifically select one item and then get details about that one specific item. However, with like primary and foreign key relationships and decisions, you can create a one-to-many relationship. And we'll briefly touch on that as we go. Interesting. So it looks like it actually just overwrote the one that I have. So here's what we're going to do. communicate with your partner. You can use the Zoom chat, you can use Slack, but one of you is going to import. And then we're going to change the name on the parent-child reporting. So under manage, we're going to go to set name and description, and then throw your initials in there. And then your partner can then do their upload. So we're gonna have to communicate with each other. Feel free to use the Zoom chat, Slack if you have access to Slack, if that's not blocked by your organization. We are gonna have to communicate with each other. So let's take a few minutes, get those imported, communicate with your server partner so that you can both have your own parent and child reporting folder. Yeah, so still spinning. So yeah, you saw how long it took for mine. And of course, with y'all in those shared instances, it's probably going to take a little bit more time than it actually took for mine to do. So we'll have to exercise a little patience with those imports. Yeah, and so Alan, go ahead and so error 404. So go ahead and clear your cache, refresh the page, and attempt to log in with the default password, I love decisions. If that doesn't work, go ahead and Slack me your instance URL. So the full URL that you're trying to log in at, and then we'll get that taken care of for you. Awesome, fantastic. And so if you've completed the import and you're not able to find the folder, go ahead and do a refresh of the decisions portal. It might be that you just need, because remember, everything is lazily loaded. Normally, I would expect it to just go ahead and show up here. However, browser-based tools, as we know, go ahead and refresh and then see if you can find that in the folder tree. And it could be that if your partner is doing this at the same time, they may have already moved it. So take a look at who else is sharing your server with you. So take a look at those initials. Feel free to ping in chat, hey, who is so-and-so on this instance? So the bit after your URL, find my clipboard. So everybody should be on a decision instance that looks more or less like this. I'm pasting this in the chat. So this is one. So the bit that's relevant here is the part that comes after the .com. This is the part that's unique to each of you. So you can say, hey, who's RW on BA14? And make sure that you coordinate with your partner. And so Hanzala is apparently sharing with Deepak and someone with the initials AEM, and has let everyone know that they've made that change, they've got theirs. And so Deepak and AEM, you guys go ahead and ping off in chat so that you can each repeat those same steps. Okay, so yeah, so to Trevor's point, we don't want to override someone else's upload, so we are going to have to communicate with each other. If we're all trying to upload at the same time and we're not communicating with our roommates, we're going to end up just butting heads for the rest of the morning. So I would love to see more talk here in the chat. So Michael says MXG, good, good, good. Oh, excellent. Well, thank you. If you prefer Han, I'm happy to go with that. Oof, yeah. So if we're getting exclude from import override or keep local version, then one of our roommates has already uploaded theirs, and we're going to need them to change that name before we do another upload so that it's not overwrite. Yeah, so if your server partner has already changed theirs, go ahead and try that import again. So yeah, Trevor, that's actually a really good idea. If there's already a project in there, go ahead and copy it. That's probably going to take a lot of the strain out of this process. We want everybody to get the feel for doing the import. That was part of the goals of doing this exercise. But with the shared server environments, going to be totally honest with you, I hadn't thought about the implications with that. So yeah, if there's already one there, try to copy it. It didn't copy data within the folder. Interesting. Oh, wrong one. This, nope, still the wrong one. So here, I'm going to go to manage. No. Yep, so there's the copy designer folder. I'm going to give it a new name. I'm going to call this RW2, parent and child reporting, so that it's not the same. And I'm going to say copy to root, so I'm not giving it another folder to go into, or you could choose your project folder that you've been working in for the rest of the week. I'm just going to move mine to root, make a copy. Oh yeah, and it totally doesn't. It didn't bring over all the stuff. Yep, so it looks like that's not going to work for us. Sorry, everybody. let's see, so we've done the import, completed renaming the main folder name, but it overwrote the files. Cool, cool, cool. All right. We're going to take a 5-minute pause, everybody. Bear with me just a moment. We're going to see if we can overcome this challenge. So off, pause your importing for just a few minutes. We're going to find a better alternative. All right, thanks everybody for your patience. So what we're gonna do is, because this was a little bit of an oversight, apologies everyone, we didn't really consider how this would work with the shared environments. At the time that we were revamping this course, there was going to be a portion where everybody was going to install decisions locally on their own computers. And we decided to go with a different plan, which, we did not consider the implications with this. So you have my sincerest apologies. So feel free to save that project. You can import it into another decisions environment and play around with this at another time if you so choose to. But instead, what we're going to do is I'm going to just show this portion of the click-through guide on my screen and have everyone follow along. So don't worry about importing. Don't worry about some of that communication and trying to keep those things from conflicting with each other. We're just going to do it together as a group. So delete that. And go back to my parent-child reporting folder. Just make sure all my stuff is in here. Cool, looks good. Does it work if imported as a local version? So not if you're sharing with another user. There's only going to be one instance of these elements in your decisions instance. So if you're on a local decisions instance, like on your computer, yes, by all means. However, in the interest of time, fast orderly, I'm just going to do it for everybody on the screen. So I can get the click-through guide back open. If you want to follow along with me, we're still on page 101. So we've imported our project, and excuse me, we're going on to page 104. So the first thing we want to do is we've taken this project that was designed by another developer, and some things about it are not quite right. We need to make some changes to the project as it exists so that we can build out the process that we want. So the first thing we're going to do, excuse me, on page 103, at the very bottom, so we're going to go into our data structures, which is where we are. We're going to go to the policy member data structure and then make a change to that policy member data structure. So I'm going to right click that and I'm going to say edit define data structure. So it's going to show me that same data definition screen that we used to create our data structures in our purchase request project. In here, I can define my data members, make changes to the types of information these data members are, add additional ones, remove them. And this is where we can manage that one-to-many relationship, by the way. If I have multiple members that are going to be part of this policy, I can make that variable or that data member a list, so that instead of just having one member ID, I could have many associated with this policy member structure. We only have one for this one though, so I'm going to leave that unchecked. But this is how we would achieve that one-to-many relationship. Now, what we're going to change in here is that all of our data types are currently set to strings. However, my date of birth variable, or my date of birth data member, excuse me, I'm going to try to keep my terminology clear, is currently set to a string to be a date time format. So I'm going to go back to the list of primitive types, and I'm going to find that date time. Once I've done that, I'm going to save my data structure. And now I'm ready to start actually working with this. So on page 104, the first thing we're going to do is create a report for the policy data structure. So I'm going to create myself a reports folder here in my designer project folder. I'm going to call it reports. And in there, from my designer folder actions up at the top, I'm going to click create report. Inside the picker, I'm going to choose the report option and give this a name. I'm going to call this the policy report. Once I click create, it's going to drop me into the reports designer as we are familiar with it. So for the data sources, we're picking which decisions data structure we're going to be reporting on, and we want this to be our policy. So even though we didn't actually, as the user, define these types, our policy data structure is still a user-defined type. It's a decisions custom data structure that was created by a decisions developer. And this one is, it might take me a minute to find it. Yeah, cool. So these are actually entities. So those of you, if you didn't already have, well, of course, don't bother following along if you weren't able to complete the import if you're on a shared instance. However, if we had, we would be seeing a new entities folder. You probably didn't have entities in your list of user-defined types before. So, but in there, I do have these three new data structures new to me. So claim, policy, and policy member. So for this report, I'm going to choose policy. Now that I've defined my data source, I'm going to go into the data fields and I'm going to declare, it looks like 5 different data fields, different columns that should appear on my report. So we're going to find the policy number, policy type, primary holder, address state, and monthly premium. Oh, these are some spectacular names. Now, just like we did when we were creating our folder activity panel relationship in our purchase request dashboard, we're going to use a selection bus to tie these elements together. So we have a unique ID, and that's our policy number. This is what's going to set those different policies apart from each other. And we can use this as a selector to choose other information from our other data structures. So I'm going to select my policy number data field up here in the data fields section so that I can see the properties for this column. In here, I'm going to go down to the send data as filter change source, just like we did before. And I'm going to create a selection bus variable name that I can use to identify these rows. And according to the guide, it says use PID, but because I tend to do these things every 6 weeks, I usually do make them a little bit more specific so that I don't end up overwriting or conflicting with any other projects that I do with other classes. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this something super long and ridiculous that I can use as my selection bus name. So I'm going to copy that so that I have it later. And then I'm going to save. Oh, and then for the monthly premium, we do want to format that as currency. So monthly premium, I'm going to click on it in the data fields and change its formatting from general to currency. So now that I've done that, I am going to go ahead and save my policy report and close the reports designer. So with our policy report done, we're now going to create a report for policy member. So I'm from my designer folder actions up at the top. I'm going to select create report again, and then again choose report. This one I'm going to call policy member report. So in this one, just like we did before, we're going to add our data source so that under user defined types, because some user defined this type, go to my entities section, and I'm going to find that policy member data structure. And then just like we did in the policy report, I'm going to add several fields. So I'm going to find the policy number. And so this is that foreign key. This is that unique ID from the policy data structure that we can use to link these two data sets together. So I'm going to add it here. And then I'm going to continue on with full name, date of birth, and member ID. Now this one, the member ID, we're going to use to link this data structure with yet another report. This one's going to go out to that policy or to that claim report that we're going to use in just a moment. So this report actually has data being shared with other data structures on both ends. So policy is going out to the policy report or data structure. Member ID associates this report with the claim data structure. So in order to make that happen, so what we want is for rows in this report to only show to our users if the policy number in that row matches the one that they've selected on the other report. So once we've added all of these things to a dashboard where our user can view these things, we want them to pick a policy row and then only show policy members that are associated with that policy number. So in order to do that, we're going to add a filter to our report. So under the filter section, I'm going to click add. I'm going to add a field filter. So the field that I want to edit is the policy. So I'm going to find the policy number section, and I'm going to add a policy number equals filter to our report. Now you can see as soon as I add that, my report disappears. It knows that it should be filtering this. And so because I haven't given it any criteria to filter based on, no results can possibly match. So everything is just gone. All right. So all of my results disappeared. Now I need to tell my filter what it should be looking for to use as selection criteria to determine if my filter matches. So I wanted to actually use that selection bus that we created before. Now this is something that is a little bit counterintuitive. And whenever I'm doing this like in practice, I'm actually trying to create a parent-child report. This is one that I always forget. I end up having to go back to documentation, look at old projects that I've done. So if you're taking notes, this is one I would want to write down. So in order to get that selection bus to operate with our filter, what I'm actually going to do is change the name of the filter to be that selection bus ID that I created before. So that's what's going to link those things together. Oh, it's just their class time. Right. The Q&A, scrum meetings. Oh, the Q&A. So now my report is still blank. That's because this is looking for a selection bus, but of course this isn't in a page. There's no selection bus to send it. So I'm not going to see any data in this report until I'm actually viewing this and sending data into that filter selection bus. So this is actually done. We're ready to move on to our next report. I believe. Let's make sure it doesn't want me to do anything else. Oh, there is one other thing. So we do have this other ID. So the member ID, of course, is going to select claims for us. So we need to do the same process that we did to link these two reports together on the member ID. So can still debug. So with reports, like there isn't a debug in the reports designer. So we're going to see this happen live once we've actually got this on the page. So far, there's nothing to debug. This is, you know, you do kind of have to have the idea of what you're doing. So the click-through guide is providing that. We're instructing on it, but there's nothing here to debug yet. I think that this will make more sense, though, once we've actually got it on the page. So for the member ID, I'm going to do the same process that we did before. I'm going to set up another selection bus. I'm going to paste in the one that I used before, except that I'm going to say that this is MID instead of PID. So now with both of those things set up, I've got my filter that's going to be pulling in our policy data structure, and I've set up my filter change source for my member ID. Now I need to get that claim data structure. So I'm going to save and close the report designer and create another report. So I'm going to create another report, and I'm going to call this the claims report. So just like we did before, I'm going to add a data source under my user defined types, because some user defined this type. Under entities, I'm going to find those claims. And we're going to add 3 fields or 3 columns to this report. It's going to be the claim amount, the member ID, and the claim date. So just like we did before, in order for this report to use the member ID as selection criteria to show which fields or which rows it displays on the page, we're going to add a filter. It's going to be a field filter, and we're going to use the member ID as the selector. We're going to say member ID equals. So in order for this to show only the rows that match our member ID that we have selected, I need to change the filter name to match my selection bus. And then we're going to make another couple of small minor formatting changes to our report. For the claim amount, I'm going to format that as currency. And for the claim date, change that to short date. So right now it's set to short date and time. We don't need time associated with this one, so we're just going to select short date. So Chris asks, is this directly setting up keys in the database? So this isn't setting up keys in the database, this is using keys in the database. So let's take a look at that. So our reports are done. So let me show you those data structures one more time. Let's see, let me try to make that clear. So when we were talking about data structures yesterday, set the runtime behavior. I might have missed something. Let's come back to that in just a moment. So whenever we were talking about data structures, whenever we're creating these, decisions is going to handle a lot of these associations for us. So I'm just going to open up the notes policy member. data structure. Decision is going to handle a lot of these things for us. Of course, these are entities, so they are part of the entity framework. So even though we've only defined these 4 fields, there are actually a ton of other fields that get created along with these that are generated by the entity framework. So all of that extra metadata. So things like an ID field get generated automatically. Fields like deleted, deleted on, deleted by, archived, a whole bunch of extra information actually gets stored that we don't see in this list, but is part of this data structure. So including an ID. So we don't ever have to create an ID for our data structures. It does that automatically. However, in order to relate them, in order to make that relationship, to set up that key relationship in my data structures, I do have to declare that there is a data type here that is that foreign key that relates to another data structure. So here I'm saying member ID is a string, and then I as the developer have to make sure that one way or another, that member ID gets placed into this data structure. So I would use flow steps in as part of my development to make sure that the member ID from the claims data set gets put into this policy member data set. Yeah, you're totally right, Alfred. I was missing a step. So we do need to do that runtime selection. So here we go. Here we go. So in each of those reports, I'm just going to go back to my reports folder and I'm going to make that change. So we're going to start with claims because this is where we were last. On my filter, runtime selection. Yeah, so runtime behavior here. So we changed the filter name. This allows the decisions to find that variable, but Alfred pointed this out to me. I did miss this step. We do need to select this runtime behavior. So right now it says not runtime editable. We're going to change that to get values from other reports. So it's going to find that value from our selection bus and make those changes. So I'm just going to briefly make that change in all of these reports. Great catch, Alfred. Oh, and this one doesn't have one. Cool. All right. So let me just make sure I'm not missing anything else the guide wants us to do, and then we're going to make this live. Number of claims. Cool. So we're going to make another dashboard. So here we have pages. We do have a dashboard template. Cool. It's already been laid out for us. However, I think I want to change this. So the way that this has been laid out, because I'm just doing this as a display for all of you, I am going to do this just slightly differently. So right now, this is a grid canvas type. It's not a grid layout type that we've been using. And I, just for my own personal preferences, I don't like to work with this in my decisions UI elements. I prefer to use the actual grid layout type. However, what the guide expects us to do is to drop our report viewer in here and then expand it down to cover that whole section. I don't like building that way. I feel like this leaves a lot of room for error for me personally. If I end up using those expansions to then cover up other elements, I feel like I lose things. And so I would prefer not to do this kind of building. It works really great for some people. I know that lots of folks are able to keep better track of their elements on the page. And of course, you can use the Explorer to identify each of those elements. And I do this quite frequently. However, for myself, I prefer to use nested grids. So what I'm going to do, so I'm going to close that out. And since I'm just doing a demonstration for you, I'm going to make this in a different way. So I'm going to make a new page. I'll call this claims dashboard. I'm going to make some layout changes just like we did yesterday. So right now, first thing is I'm going to delete the grid layouts that are in here so that I'm left just with the base canvas underneath. And then I'm going to make the changes that I want. So I know I want one very large column and I want one that's a little bit smaller. So I'm going to make it half the size of the other one, resizable. And then for my rows, I'm actually just going to create one resizable row. So what I'm left with is this 2-column report, one very large column on the left and one smaller column on the right. And if you're looking on page 110, what I actually want is to have 2 smaller sections in my right-hand column to display those other values. So I'm going to find another grid layout, and I'm going to nest that in this column over here on the right. And just like we did with our dashboard that we created for a purchase request, it's a 2-row, 2-column grid structure. And I'm just going to change that to instead be just 1 column and 2 rows. So I now have this over and under. So now that I've got my layout the way that I want it, I'm going to grab those 3 report viewers and drag them onto my page. And for each of these, I'm going to map in one of the 3 reports that we created previously. So the big one in the middle is going to be the policy report. So I'm going to say pick or create. I'm going to pick one that I already made, and I'm going to grab that policy report that we just created. For the one at the top, this is going to be the policy member. So I'm going to pick or create, pick, and grab our policy member report. And for the one at the bottom, this is going to be our claims report. Claims report. Cool. Good, good, good. So now, just like we've done before, my page is just about ready. And in order to see these things actually happen live, I'm going to go ahead and put them into an actual dashboard. So I'm going to create a folder that's just a standard folder, not a designer project folder, and call this my claims dashboard. And in here, I'm going to manage page dashboard and add that page or dashboard with my claims dashboard page. Once that's done, click away and back in, and here are my reports. So I can see that my selection bus has been added to the URL. So let's see what happens when I start clicking some rows. Oh, no, see, I forgot to do the report thing again. This gets me every time. So remember, everybody, if you get the slider, this is a setting that we have to change on our report, on the actual report itself. So I'm going to go back into the page and make that change very quickly. So edit the default report. Somewhat counterintuitively, this is under the grid view section. Under the grid settings type, instead of default, I'm going to say specified and then disable the left click slider. So no actions. Then I'm going to do the same for the policy member report. Under the grid view, grid settings type specified, and row left click action type, no actions, to disable that slider. And so now let's see how this works. So claims dashboard, when I make a selection, I can see the values in my 2 reports over on the right changing. So every time I select one of these rows, Decisions is looking at that policy ID, and we can see it's 14304, 73457. Now I look up in my URL and I can see that my selection bus now has that same ID. So that's what's being showed in my actual URL to make selections for these reports over here on the right. When I select another one of these policy member reports, I can see that it's adding an additional URL or additional value to the URL for the member ID, and that is updating the report down below. So whenever we make changes to our selections, it's changing the options that we get back in our reports. So that's parent-child reporting. It's using related data structures that we as the developer have linked the ID fields in each of them together as foreign and primary keys. so that we can relate that data and view it in this parent-child fashion. Let's see, Shahrzad says, how did you get this page? So we created this page. So in the page designer, we created this layout. Yeah, so to disable the slide bar in the report itself, so I actually have to go into the report designer, and then under grid view, we say grid settings type, we change that from default to specified. And then for the row left click action type, we change that from show slider to no actions. Oh, and so how does it show up in the folder? So anytime we're working with a page, so just creating the page doesn't make it accessible to any users. So to add a page to a folder, we have to create a folder. It's not a designer folder. You can see that this is just a standard folder. There are no designer actions in the white bar up here. But in that folder, we would go to manage, page dashboard, add page dashboard, and then link it to the page that we created. All right. And so that is our parent-child reporting project. I'm sorry, I know that that was a little bit more chaotic than I think any of us were expecting. I do regret that we weren't able to all follow along together, but hopefully that demonstration was good. You can always go back and rewatch this video. It's going to be available for you in the LMS, for the foreseeable future. And also the click-through guide will walk you through these steps. This is something that decisions developers and business analysts do pretty frequently. And so we would encourage you, if you haven't already, do, after this class, or, if you're going to continue on to developer, do attempt at least to install decisions onto your local system, so that you can perform this for yourself. You can see it only took about maybe an hour to complete. And that was with, stopping to explain and things like that. So it's a good exercise to try on your own time if you should choose to. So, but before we take lunch, do we have any questions about anything we've covered so far? Anything we want to discuss? Yeah, go for it. So Trevor asks, is there a light version of decisions to practice, something that doesn't require a license? So yeah, absolutely. You can download decisions and install it on any local system. It installs as a free trial. However, even when the trial ends, it only cuts you off from a very select number of advanced features. You can still build flows. You can do everything that we do in training without a license. And so Tina says, when someone modifies your project, the system generates an email. Yes, so anytime elements that you own get changed in decisions, you will get an email about that. So yeah, you can turn off those messages and you can modify them. But yes, it's meant to alert you that you, as the owner, the developer of that element, that something has been changed. Yeah, and so can you go over the exam again, what to expect? So it's going to be the question, many, if not all of the questions that were on the entry exam that you took at the beginning of the week, but then also it's going to cover things that we have covered as part of this course. So the click-through guide should serve as a pretty good reference for you to answer the questions on the quiz. There's of course also the decisions documentation. Of course, you're going to have those resources available to you when you're actually working for real. So you can definitely use those, and you should find all of the answers you need for the exam in either of those two places. So in the click-through guide, almost everything should be in there, and then also the decisions documentation to look up keywords to get additional context. All right, everybody. Let's go ahead. What is the Q&A workshop? Q&A workshop on the agenda. So that's largely going to be Q&A. We're going to look back through your projects, go over any questions, anything that anybody wants to work on. Hey, I missed this section, that sort of stuff. Make sure that we have good understanding. We'll probably also do some EOD challenges because we have missed, I believe, at least one of those now. So we'll have an EOD challenge to go back over. Do you know how to modify the color highlighting on the report viewer? I tell you what, Alfred, let's save that one for the Q&A portion. Let's go over that together at that time. And so in that case, let's go ahead and I'm going to say we break for lunch. We're going to go ahead and take an hour. And when we come back, we will continue on our business analyst learning journey with one another. So it's currently 12:07. We will come back at, let's just make it even at 1:10 p.m. East US time. So 1 hour and 3 minutes from now. Enjoy your lunch, everybody, and I'll see you then. resume the recording, and we're going to build our CSV project. So page 116 in the guide, we download our CSV file. And then beginning on page 117, we start building out the process to do this. So I'm going to create another project folder. So I'm going to create a new folder here in my Decision Studio. This is going to be a designer project folder. And I'm going to call this, for me, it's going to be BA Oct CSV manipulation. Just like all of the other elements that we've been creating in decisions for yourselves, just use your initials or something to differentiate your project from your neighbor. Oh, I should have created that at root. I didn't select the at root, I should have. So it dropped it into the last folder that I was working in. So in order to move that, just to show everybody, I'm just gonna right click that folder name, that new folder that I just created, go to manage, and then say move folder to root so that it's not nested inside one of my other project folders. So for this project, we're going to build out a couple of forms. Yeah, just a second, Jared. So we're going to build two forms for this project. One that's going to allow us to upload the CSV file that we're working with, and then another that will allow us to edit that CSV file, actually manipulate the values that are in it. So first thing we're going to do in our new project folder is we're going to create the intake form. So I'm going to click the create form option in my designer folder actions at the top of my designer folder, and then choose form. I'm going to call this, what does the guide want us to call it? My CSV intake form. Once I click create on that form, it's going to drop me into the form designer. So the layout for the form that we're going to design is on page 118. Here we go. So the element that it wants us to add is called a file import control. So I'm going to search for that. Well, first I'm going to change the layout a little bit because right now we have a 2-column form. This is going to be relatively small. The only thing it's going to do is take an upload of a form. So I don't need the 2 columns. I don't need all of this extra stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and remove one of these columns and shrink my form down. So I now have a single column form, and then I'm going to use the control down at the bottom right of my canvas to just adjust that size so it's a little bit more reasonable for what we're doing. And then in the form controls toolbox, I'm going to search for file import so that we can find So I'm finding the file upload, and this is what I usually use for this, and I believe it will probably work the same, but I want to try to find the one that the guide wants us to use. So it's probably not searchable. So don't panic if you're searching for something that you've been told should exist. Remember that there's something like 2,500, 3,000 steps in the steps toolbox, and most of them are not searchable. It's really just the most commonly used features that are actually searchable. So we're going to try to find that file import control in the actual folder tree. And we're on page 118. Yeah, so CSV edit is what we're going to be using next. So for this one, wait, what am I looking at? Data images, controls, layouts. I'm going to go in the data section, and I'm going to look under the file category. Here we go. So there's our CSV editor. We're going to be using that in the next form. And I tell you what, I don't see the file import control that we're supposed to be looking at. Jared, if you know whether like there's a secret to finding it, but I assume that the file upload will work just the same, right?
Yeah, file upload is the controller you're looking for.
Oh, cool. Good deal. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that file upload over here onto my canvas. go. We're going to go ahead and set the data name as import. And then we're going to add an action button to our form. I'm going to adjust my controls down here at the bottom so that my button fits nicely on the page just by removing one of those 120 blocks. So on the file import, we're going to make some changes to the configuration for this. So we want to change the max upload size to 8,192. So here in the max file size area, I'm going to enter that value, 8192. Here we go. And that's all that this form needs. It's going to upload a file that we select here. Of course, this will act like a lot of forms that you've probably seen before. You see forms on the internet that ask you to select a file from your computer to upload, and then it's going to import that file. So we're done with this form. We're going to go ahead and click Save. And then we're going to create one more. Here we go. This one's still on page 118. It's going to be our view CSV file form. Once I give that a name and click Create, I'm dropped back into the form designer. And in here, we're going to find that CSV editor page component, form component, excuse me. So CSV editor that we saw previously. So for this one, just to make life easy, I am just going to use the expansion options here just to fill up the whole page, because this is the only thing that's going to be on here. So I told y'all before, I don't usually like to do this. I usually like to use nested grids so that I can keep a little bit more control over what elements are on the page and what's showing. However, this is going to be the only thing here, so I'm not too worried about it. Once I've got that on the page, I'm going to drop my button, and this is going to be my done button. So for the CSV editor, we do still have some configuration to do. So the data name that we're going to use here is going to be file. And then one other option that we're going to select here is the header. So we're going to say first row is header. So this is telling our CSV editor that the first row in our CSV is actually going to be like column titles, that this isn't meant to be like editable space. This isn't data that we're meant to be manipulating. So once we've done that, we can go ahead and save and close the form designer. So next on page 119, we're going to create a new flow called process CSV flow. Once we give it a name and click create, we're dropped into the flow designer. So good question from Tina. So is there a limit on the amount of rows allowed? I know that sometimes when we're doing CSV steps, we do have to like actually declare how many rows we want it to, or no, that's columns. I'm pretty sure it does do rows like infinitely. So let's take a look. Let's see if we can answer that by looking at the actual step. It may tell us. Mhm. So that's rows per page. Yeah, so I want to say no, or even if there is a limit, Tina, it's probably so high that we would never actually run into it. So here in our process CSV flow, we're going to add 2 show form steps. And for each of these, we're going to map them to the 2 forms that we just created. So for the first one, this should be our CSV upload form. So I'm going to pick our create form and pick our recently created CSV intake form. Connect our import line to my second show form step. And then I'm going to pick or create my CSV view file form that we created second. And then I'm just going to connect that to my end step. Now here, our second form takes an input of file and it wants file data. Now our previous form is going to have an output of file data called import. So we're going to map that import into our file input on the second form. Now it's a good idea to always rename your variables to be something that is descriptive that you can use later on in your development to know which information you're passing around. When your flow becomes very large, I mean, I can tell you, I've got some mighty flows that I get lost in if I don't take the time to, while I'm building, actually change my variable names and make sure that I'm keeping these elements clear, even for myself. If I go a couple of weeks without looking at something that I've built before, even if I created it, I'm going to come back and say, gosh, what was I thinking? I'm not sure what the idea I had behind this was, and I have to go back and start renaming variables then. And so in order for the tail to show off the end of our first form, we have to actually map it. So if we've just got a show form step, there's no tail on the end of it until we actually say pick or create form and assign a form to be run by that show form step. Once we do that, the tails appear, and those are created by the actual buttons on the form. Here we go. So for my first form, I'm going to rename this. Even though import is pretty descriptive for what we're actually doing, I'm just going to give it CSV import just so that it's a little bit clearer to me. All right, so now that I've renamed my import variable, I'm going to map that into my second form so that the file is created here. It gets uploaded and turned into a variable that decisions can use as file data type. And then this form is going to take it as an input so it can display it for us. Yeah, so our first form has an output that was originally just import. It's a good idea to always rename your variables so that you can make sure to keep those straight later. So even though import is pretty descriptive, I just changed that to CSV import. That's the output of our first form. For the second form, it takes a single input that's also file data. And so we just mapped that to our CSV import variable that gets created by the first form. And so now that my flow is complete, it's just going to have these two forms in it. I'm going to go ahead and do a debug and see how this works. So I start debugging. It shows me my form. I'm going to select the file that I want. Grab that software catalog exercise sheet that we created, that we downloaded previously. Click OK, and then import that. And then here is our actual CSV. We can click into these fields. We can make changes to that. So we can import that CSV, make any alterations to this that we wanted. Like I'm going to change Flappy Bird to Flappy Birds, and Chorus AI. And we're going to call this banana, just so that we can have something changed on the other end so we can see how this works. So I click done. My flow is completed. And if I view the outputs here, it's file data, so it's not going to show me. But we could actually export that, display it in another way so that our CSV is now manipulated. It's been changed in whatever way we see fit from right there in the form. Our user has that direct access to then pass that CSV into other steps and do more things with it. So everybody go ahead and give that a debug, change some data in your CSV, and go ahead and ask any questions. All right, I see no questions. It's pretty straightforward, right? We all gotten to test this out? Yeah, so use case for the CSV editor. You know, there are many times where we may want to make process-driven, rules-driven changes to data that we import via CSV, but there may also be times where we actually want a human being to review that data and make manual changes to it. So anytime we don't want to just import and then make logical decisions based on rules that we've already automated, if we want a user to actually be able to review that data, maybe fix a typo, maybe change some elements of it for whatever reason, then we would use that CSV editor for that. And if you continue on with us through the rest of developer training, we're going to show you some of those automated methods as well. That's one of the projects that we do later in the developer course to actually programmatically make edits to a CSV or to an Excel file. No, I'm sure not. Yeah, so to know which exact version, I think I know, I think it's 7.7. However, to find out, we can always go to the info panel in any decisions element. And so this one that you just created, you just made this flow. So I'm using 7.5. This is my local instance. But check it out on yours. So it should, I believe it's going to be 7.7. All right, everybody. I see no other questions about the CSV exercise. So I'm going to step away and let Jared take over from here.
Hey everybody, I hope you guys had a great day. Give me a few seconds and I'm gonna give you guys the next thing that we're going to do for the rest of the day. So the plan is right now we just have a Q&A portion, so you can ask me or Randy any questions that you may have. I will demonstrate that to you on the call, and then I will give you guys a final exam for the day. So that's what we have going on for the rest of the day. So if you have any questions in the chat, in the QA, feel free to ask. And if not, we'll go ahead and give the final exam. Tina asked, do we learn the results immediately from the final exam? So I'm going to be honest with you, Tina, I actually don't know because we've just launched this new LMS. So I want to say probably yes, but it will be a new experience for all of us. So most likely I want to say that probably will happen unless there are some questions that need to be sent to either Randy or myself to review your answers and give you points for. But if there aren't those types of questions and it's just a multiple choice, then you should be able to see and get the results immediately. Another question from Steven. I tried to figure out why my dashboard activity panel does not update. Here's what we can do. How long, we have another question. How lengthy will the test be? When would we even get time to look at notes? So the exam is open book. So you can use any of the notes that you have, the documentation site to look up the answers if you want. But that's what you would have to do to so you would have that option if you decide to utilize those things. You won't be penalized for it. All right. Let's see. My selection bus name is named SMCSFID, and my report filter ID has the same value SCM or SMCFID. All right, so you're sending that on your selection bus. Let's take a look, Stephen. I'm going to set you as a panelist and we'll have you share your screen and we will see what's going on. And I'll just be answering questions as you come on, promote to panelists. Alfred asks, could you please show us how to hide/show multiple fields in a form that perform auto rendering fields of other fields, auto rendering of other fields not affected of the condition? Yeah, I can definitely show you that after I assist Stephen. All right, Stephen, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, let's take a look at your report configuration.
Yep. Let's see, share that screen. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All righty. So this was working and I didn't change anything else. So I'm just kind of at a loss to why it isn't working. But in any case, the selection bus name here is SMCFID. And then if I go over to the report and I go to folder ID and I look down here, send data as filter channel and then filter change source name SMCFID. And as I understand it, if those two things are set, then when I view the page, when I click on one of these elements, it should be updating this. Now this is interesting too. After I save those, if I click off and click back on, it usually displays the first item in here. Unless I just broke something, but I don't think I did.
So since it looks like the folder activity panel is having some issues, let's go ahead and let's just delete that one.
Yep, there it is there. So it always displays like the first one, like this says 739.
Yeah, so I see that. So a quick troubleshooting thing that we do is just go to your page designer, delete that folder activity panel, and then re-add it. Sometimes it's just kind of like the typical like refresh your cache or you turn it on. That's kind of something we do here at Decisions, where if we have a control that's not behaving like it should and we've confirmed the settings look good, then let's just delete that page control and then re-add it.
All right, so you want me to delete this guy?
Yep, just delete that one and then drag another one over.
And what was that called?
Folder activity panel is the name of the control. And then check the box, get folder ID from selection bus. And then paste in your, the one you used before. Perfect.
Was
All right,
that it? We didn't need to set anything else? I know I can turn that off.
Nope, we don't need to set anything else. Just go ahead and save. And then let's see if we got that to appear with data, because then you should be good.
I don't see it updating.
Yeah, I don't see it updating either. Let's go to the report one more time.
Yep.
Because I see it there. See ya. Click on the folder ID for me. Ignition, include brand, can group, SM, CFID is filter change source. Are both reports outputting this? So,
No.
okay, I was curious.
Are you asking if both reports? There's only one report on that page.
Well, for the chart, I think that's also being sourced by a report.
Let's see.
So like we go to the other,
Okay.
that report. I'm just curious, click on folder ID. I just wonder if that's outputting it too. Nope, okay, so it's not. We have that unchecked.
Yeah.
I'm curious, if you go, can you view your dashboard in the portal? So like set user portal visibility. Right click that folder where your mouse is over.
Uh-huh. Oh, sorry,
Yep.
right click.
Yep, manage. And then do user portal on the bottom, show, user portal visibility show.
You want me to switch to portal?
Yes, now switch to portal and then let's look at the page. I'm just curious to see if there's something. Let's switch, that will make that appear and then switch on another one. There you go. It might have been something in the designer view or something. It looks like it works fine now.
Okay, so it works here. It's just not when you're previewing it, and I can live with that. It was, oh. Now it's
There we go.
working. Yeah, I don't know. All right, cool. Well, I
Awesome.
appreciate that.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
Yeah.
All righty. All righty. So let's see, we had a couple of questions. Alfred asked, could you show us how to hide and show multiple fields in a form that perform auto rendering fields? Yeah, I can definitely do that. So a way to do that is, let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to do screen. Let's do this. I'm going to do screen 3. And then I'll move my screen over. So a typical way that we do that, Alfred, is if we want to have that type of behavior is, I also grab my chat too. Now I'm all set up. Is we can place controls. There's 2 ways we can do that. We can place controls inside another grid, or we can multiple select different controls to have their visibility turned off. And then what we can do with that is then enable all of them via an active form flow. So let me go ahead and show what I've just described. So this is going to be showing, some hiding, showing, hiding, form stuff. I'm gonna create a form. And it's gonna be example form or example. And then what I'm gonna do, so here is an actual common use case that you can see in decisions if you want to hide and show multiple controls. So let's say I have 2 types of requests. I can have a software request and I can have a general request. And let's say on my software grid, I'm going to define 2 grids, right? And let's say on my grid layout, this is going to be called my general grid. This is where I can submit all the general requests that I want. Like I need a new desk, I need a new chair, I need a new lamp, desk lamp, whatever the case may be. Let's say this is the grid for that. So I'm going to put this grid and I'm going to give it some, I'm actually going to remove one of these rows. I'm going to edit. And then with these rows, I'm going to do 30. Oops. Oh. Give myself some options here. Perfect. And I think I added a little too much. Perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add those things that I described. So let's say I have a general item I want. Ooh, I didn't do what I wanted. I didn't do the shift label. I'm going to do that again so I can shift the label. So let's say, I keep messing that up. Let's say I have a general label. General item or item request. There we go. And then I want to have, let's say I'll put quantity in there as well. So we'll just say quantity. And shift label. So this is going to be my general request grid. I'm just going to have an item request and a quantity. And then let's say, and I'm going to make this a color so we can distinguish the color. And let's say I'm going to make this a little gray. So it's going to highlight a little gray. So it's going to be a little different. And then let's say I want another area of my form to show a software request. So I'm going to grid here. I'm going to do grid layout here. And over here, I'm actually going to do the same thing that I did with the general grid. I'm going to rename it to software grid. You'll see why I do this in just a moment. And then I'm going to edit this. And then I'm going to give this some rows. Perfect. And then now what I'm going to do is add things like, let's say I can request software. So this is going to be select software. And I'm going to use a string and I'm going to use, let's see, a static. And we're going to say this is like MS Project. This is like MS Office. This is Flappy Birds. Birds, I can spell. And let's say Oracle DB. All right, so now I have software that I can select. And I'm also going to say this is going to be licenses. So licenses, shift enter. I don't think that's how you spell licenses, but we'll roll with it. So now with this grid, I'm actually going to change it a different color just so that we can distinguish between which grid is available. And you know that these are two separate sections of the decisions form. So I'm going to make this a light green because I love green. Okay. So now what we can do is based on these checkbox selections, I'm going to say hide one or the other. This one's going to be the general request. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to the general request checkbox right here. And then what I can do is I can say that data name here is going to be general request checkbox. And then I'm going to do the same thing here, but this one's going to be the software. So it's going to be software checkbox. Text is going to be software checkbox and data name is going to be software. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say, hey, let's see, let me make sure that I have this all set to optional. I want them to be optional for the sake of this example. Optional and optional. All right, I'm going to save this. All right, so now we have my forms. Now what I'm going to do is if this software, if this checkbox is checked, it's going to reveal item request and quantity. If this software button is checked, then it's going to, actually, I don't really need both of those. I could, but I'm actually going to delete this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this one here because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, if the software checkbox is unchecked, it's going to show the item request quantity. If it is checked, then it's going to hide this one and then only show the select software. So how do we do this? We do this by using an active form flow. So I'm going to go to my base. I'm going to add an active form flow, and I'm going to call this the determine request type. And then I'm going to have this run at startup, and I'm going to have this run on the software checkbox value change because I want it to trigger every time this checkbox thing gets run. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this rule flow. And what I'm going to do is now I can say, hey, I want to hide, go to the form rules category. And then I say I want to hide controls, and then I want to show controls, right? I'm gonna have to do this and flip back and forth between which one I want. Now you may be asking, well, you have multiple controls in the grid. Why aren't you using the multiple controls? Here's the reason why. The reason why is because instead of hiding multiple controls, what I can do is I can actually hide the grid that everything is on. And then when I do that, all I have to do, or if I hide the grid, then it will hide all the components that are on that grid. So that's why I only need to check to see if the is value true. Value is true. I'm going to grab the value, which is going to be the checkbox. So it's going to be form data. It's going to be the software checkbox. I want to determine if the value is true. If the value is true, then I want to hide a control, then I want to show a control. And what I'll do is I'll just group these steps. I'm going to Control C, Control V. Let's see, Control C, Control V, copy it right there. So I can use my shortcuts like we were asking about. So I'm going to have the hide show control. So if it's true, it's false. I'm going to attach it here. Now on this hide control, if the value is true, so I'm saying if the software checkbox is checked, then what I want to do is I want to hide form data, and I want to hide the, let's see, the general requests, which is the name of that grid that I gave it. And then I want to show the software request grid that I named here. And also, if the other is true, then I want to hide the software grid. And then I want to show the general requests. Perfect. So now all I need to do is I just need to put this flow. I already have it to run on the value change, and it's going to run at startup. So it's automatically going to configure which one's going to be revealed at runtime. So now I'm going to do a flow, and I'm going to say, hey, let's run this. Oops. Let's run my form. Right. I'll put this here. And then what I'm going to do is drag that form over. Show form, pick example, pick, attach it up. And then now when I debug this, you will see immediately I have the software one is missing. And then if I check this, now the select from software and licenses, the misspelled licenses appears. And if I uncheck this, then it swaps back and forth. And so that's how you can configure hiding multiple controls by just referencing the grid that they're on. That's why we advise so heavily use grids, because you can then be able to say, hey, I'm just going to hide the grid, which hides all the controls on it, instead of having to enable multiple controls or hide multiple controls, and then just kind of takes a long time. Let's see. G Woods asked, do you guys have practice projects anywhere like EOD style things? So we don't have practice style projects. The thing that I would advise is I'll link you my YouTube channel. I would say that's the closest thing that we have. I actually have on the channel a way to build a calculator in decisions. So if you ever want to just, learn how to build a calculator and just use the different controls that we would use to build that, that will show you how to use things like event triggers, evaluate dynamic expressions. So I would say go to my YouTube channel and do the creating a calculator in decisions. That will definitely be a project-like style build. Plus, I'll also be, this weekend, I'll also be working on the dynamic document creation flow that I created. I'm going to be showing that too, and that's going to be a new video that would be like a project style, kind of, oh, this is how you do this, or this is how you do that. So that's where we're going to be on that one. Josh Adar asked, can we configure it to take the same position, yes, that would use something called a vertical stack. And then what that would say is you would put both those grids in a vertical stack, and then you would say have that vertical stack fit children, and then it would push up to the top or to the right. That that section of the grid, so you're not having two sections appear that way. I will let you know that a lot of if you want to have really nice intense form styling, what you're going to have to do is use a lot of CSS will be your friend in that way, because you can get those animations and those things that you want through that. That's why a lot of our customers, they do run a lot of external UI and then use the decision logic on the back end. For that reason, because some of configuring the vertical stack and the horizontal stacks, they're good, but you'll have more flexibility with external UI tools. But yes, you can do that much. Let's see, we got another question in the chat. What should the project look like? Are there any criteria? Does it have to be uploaded and presented tomorrow? Yeah, so the project it has to be uploaded, and no, there's no really criteria, but yes, you will upload it and present it tomorrow. I will let you guys know it's super lax. It's not a grueling, like, all right, you got to get above 70. A lot of it, it's kind of completion. It's kind of a completion grade. So you want to make sure that you did it and it functions. If you did it and it functions, we may ask you a couple questions like, show us this form, show us this part of your flow, or whatever the case may be. But it's not meant to be stress inducing of, oh my goodness, I got to study for this final. It's just, hey, if you've built the project, if you've gone through it, if you paid attention to me or Randy, you'll be in a good spot. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. We'll ask, hey, Jared, is there any documentation on CSS implementation and decisions that is more in depth than what is on the doc site? Not sure. So I'm not sure what you mean by more in depth. So what we usually do is we just in decision will show you where to set that in decisions, but there isn't like a list of we don't teach you CSS, right? That's a whole other thing. So we don't teach CSS here. We'll teach you decisions and how to integrate with that, but there's not a lot of, hey, how do I define a class? How do I write a CSS? How do I write a hover effect? That's where you would go to like W3C schools, or you would interface with your UI guy. We just show this is how you integrate with it and use it and how you can reskin the tool. So, but nothing, if that's what you're looking for, like how to program in CSS, we don't go into that level because that's its whole separate language. Alfred asked, okay, thank you, Jared, for showing the solution. I'll take note of the vertical stack. It's just, yep, the vertical stack is very helpful. Yep, no, I enjoy it. Vertical stacks are really cool. There's also horizontal stacks, tab containers. There's a lot of cool UI elements. I think, Alfred, I'll even show you guys. So if you want to know how you use it. So right, I have these two grids right here. I'm going to actually move this grid to the top. And I'm actually going to move this grid to the top. So let's say I want to use a vertical stack, right? I want it to slide up and slide down. So I'm going to type in vertical stack. I'm going to put this up here. Now notice my vertical stack is just this white space, right? It's a layout container. So what that means, what I have to do is I need to drag over, oops, that's my label. No. So let me go. I still just got the label. So I may have to, I got to scroll this down a little bit just so I can grab. I just need to grab. There we go. So now I got the grid. So I'm just going to place it. Notice how I can slide it into any part of the vertical stack. So I'm going to place this one up top here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my software one and place this here. Where'd it go? I did not place it where I wanted to go. Place it right here. So notice now I have that there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent control this. Parent control one more time to grab my vertical stack, and I'm going to move it up. And so now what I can do is I'm going to shove this a little bit up, a little bit down. Perfect. Remove it. And then now on the vertical stack itself, I would have to configure we see where it says children mode size scroll. What you'll need to do is fit children. And then when you have fit children select, then you should be able to have the dynamic where it scrolls up and scrolls down. So here's the whole general grid, right? All this is the general grid. I check this box, now it's all software grid. I uncheck this, now it's all the general grid. And then I check this, now it's all software grid. So that's how it would look like, where it just kind of looks like it just switches the entire thing and gives you just all the requests that you want. So that's how you would configure that to get that type of design. Yep, it's pretty cool. Any other questions? Do you want to have that project? Yeah, I can send you that project if you want it. That's fine. I'll put this, I'll even do it right now. So showing, let me export that and I can add it. Alrighty, so I've downloaded, I'll get that in the LMS. All right, if there are no more questions, then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna give you guys the exam. And I'll show you how to find it. Now, it might not show up for me because I don't think I've attended all 5 days because my student account was not logged in. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to find it, but I do know. Alrighty. So if you find your final exam, you're going to log into your LMS and you're going to click on My Courses and Learning Plans up at the top. So you can have your business analyst, and then you click on My Courses and Learning Plans. Now, because this account has been a bad student and has not attended the 4 or 5 days of training, this padlock is going to be here because I did not meet the criteria for this. So what you're going to do is you're going to log into the LMS. You shouldn't have this padlock on it. And then you should be able to run this final exam. Go ahead and take that. And then once you have finished that and you've taken that final exam, we're going to, that will be it for our training for the day. And you guys can, enjoy the rest of the evening. And then we'll see you guys tomorrow at 9 a.m. where we'll grade and do the last part of the of training. So log into your LMS, go to the Decisions Business Analyst Final Exam located in Learning Plans, and go ahead and take that final exam. Any questions over that? So make sure that you're up here where you see where you go to My Learning. So you should have My Learning and you see Business Analyst. You want to click on the bottom part where it says Learning Plan. And then when you click on the learning plan, you're going to see the Decisions Finalist or Decisions Analyst Final Exam. Yep, that's tomorrow. So tomorrow's going to be where you guys go through that, but the project exam is referring to this business analyst final exam. There is a time limit, correct? I don't think there is a time limit. I don't think there is. I mean, definitely complete it as fast as possible. I mean, as fast and efficiently as possible, but I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's timed. It's not like a CompTIA certification. Can you go back and change the answers if you got around? No, it's like a final exam. So once you take the final exam and you submit it, then that's your grade. You won't be able to go back and change it in the same session. I mean, yeah. So yeah, it's like any type of online quiz, right? When you're taking the quiz, you can scroll up to the previous question, change the question if you want to, or change the answer if you think you select the wrong one, and then you can submit it. It's open book, Hansela. So it's open book, so you can just use any resources that you have available. Oh, let me see. Let me make sure that you're in that learning plan. Royal, you did say you saw the business analyst course, right? Okay, so you're here. So you're here. Do you see this window here where it says business analyst? Okay, so then my next question is, do you see then this text right here? This is learning plan. Instructor-led training there. That's a completed badge. Interesting. Jocelyn, once you've taken the exam, yes, you can go ahead and leave this Zoom. So to stay on the Zoom when you take the exam, just in case you have any questions or if there's any issues, me and Randy want to be made aware of those. So you can leave once you've completed the exam. No, this exam, take the exam now and complete it. I don't believe it will be available tomorrow, but just take this time right now, right? We have a whole, like I said, I don't think it's take you guys 2.5 hours to take. It should take maybe an hour, but go ahead and just take it and knock it out. I'm going to investigate that. All right, let's see, groups, manage course. Oh, thanks. All right, so I have someone looking into it for you. We'll give him a second. Once I get notified if there's an update, I'll let you know. No, stay on the Zoom when you take the exam, just in case if you run into any issues, right? Me and Randy want to, start. So, all right, everyone start the exam now. If you have any questions, stay on the Zoom call, just in case you have any issues with access to it, right? So that's why we want you to stay on the Zoom call as you take it. Will, go ahead and refresh your browsers or log out and log back in, and you should be able to see the instructor-led trading. Or you should be able to select the learning plan and then go into that quiz. Will, did you take the initial assessment? Okay. Yeah, go ahead and take the initial assessment and then take the final. John, do you have a question? Yeah, I see you have your hand raised.